Your example, Jonathan, of using companion animals to get people to connect with the fact that animals have inner lives, rich inner lives, and anyone who has spent time with a companion animal, typically like a cat or a dog in Western countries, knows, undeniably that animals have a rich inner experience. What about the inner lives of other animals? What don't we know?
Yeah, usually people ask, what do we know? And of course, one of the paradoxes of scientific discovery is that the more we know, the more questions we have, and the more ignorant we feel. What we don't know and what we'll never know, unfortunately, is what it's like to be inside the body and the mind and the experiences of another being. And I'm glad I said being there, because I was going to say of another animal and implying another species, but really that privacy does extend to some degree to our own species. We can use our spoken language to convey pretty explicit meaning, and that's a big step up for us. But even then, I could tell you that I'm feeling delighted when, in fact, I'm suffering inside, or vice versa. We can lie, we can fabricate. The point I'm really getting at here is that we are kind of black boxes in the sense that one cannot know how another's feeling in terms of precisely and exactly what it's like. To know what it feels like to a rat to be tickled in the belly, we can look at them and the way they behave and respond. They'll chase the hand to be tickled again and all that stuff. We can, so I don't want to sound like an agnostic here. I don't want to sound like, we therefore have to throw our hands up and say, well, we'll never know. Really, we can know, and there's so much we know, and we need to use that knowledge when we see the rat chasing the hand, and when we hear the rat making ultrasonic chirps when they're tickled in the belly, and they clearly love it. When we see a fish who swims up to a trusted diver to receive strokes, they're not getting any food. Elephants in Kenya, when they're played back recordings of the voices of Maasai warriors, a tribe that carries spears and occasionally harms elephants. The elephants startle and they run away, and they stop and look nervously back over their shoulders to see if there's any Maasai coming. Whereas if the scientists play recordings of the voices of local farming tribes who are not a threat to elephants, they don't respond the same way. I just give those as random examples of the inner worlds of animals that we can access, that we can study, that we can know about. And goodness, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt when there is some doubt, when we're reasonably certain that they have capacities. There's much more harm done to them if we assume they don't have those capacities and treat them accordingly than if we assume they do have those capacities and treat them better.
You just spoke about insect sentience, and it reminded me of an outreach conversation Natasha had recently in Chiang Mai, Thailand, at a Cube of Truth, where she was struggling to get a guy on side because he was using an insects though argument, wasn't he? Do you remember that one?
I do remember that. And there's this disconnect obviously between humans and land animals, and then again even deeper disconnect, as we've discussed, with fish below the sea. And then you throw insects into the mix, and it's just like people cannot make any kind of connection with these animals. How do we bridge that gap, do you think? How do we make people care more about insects? And how would you respond to someone saying they're just insects, they're not sentient or whatnot?
Well, I think we really wade into dangerous territory if we try and gauge their capacities according to ours. We're dealing with a different universe with insects. We're dealing with creatures who, in some contexts, may seem completely incapable of feeling any pain or anything. And then in other contexts, very clearly, they appear to be sentient. There's evidence for cognition. There's problem solving. But bees, especially honeybees totally throw all our biases about insects out the window. Of course, that leaves that big question about, well, what applies to a honeybee? Does that necessarily apply to a phantom midge or a grasshopper or some other insect? So it's a very complicated landscape. But, at the very least, let's talk about it. Let's engage in dialogue here.
Do they seek pleasure?
It's a great question, and I'm going to have to grapple with that in my book. I don't have a clear answer. I'm trying to think of an example, and I can tell you that flies have pretty rich sex lives. They seem to really like getting it on, and they have really complex, often quite large genitalia that are evolved to fit in a complex way in each other. and they often get locked there, which is, from the male's perspective, is probably good because it keeps other males out. And sometimes he has to do a 180-degree rotation, and sometimes the female stabs him in the head and sucks his insides out and eats him up, and then his dried husk drops off, but his genitalia remain in place. I mean, there's bizarre stuff that goes on in the insect world, and particularly in the fly world of fly sex. You're just going to have to wait for the book, I guess, before you get more detail than that.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
I tell you, there is French kissing and oral sex in fly sex.
No way.
There you go. You've heard it all, folks.